So welcome to the Tadat Coffee Chats. Welcome once again. We are happy to have you all live today on the Tadat Coffee Chat that is looking at tax dispute resolutions and their linkages to the audit function. We are looking at the successes and the challenges. My name is Blenda Nakazi Mogeza, working with the Uganda Revenue Authority, and good morning and good afternoon to all members who are live on our YouTube channels, on the LinkedIn, and on the Zoom. We are streaming live from the Tadat Secretariat channel. And with me, I have colleagues from the tax administrations, Uganda Revenue Authority, Juliet Nsime Odoki. We have Gary Mulenga from the Zambia Revenue Authority and Dr. Folasade Koka from the Internal Revenue Service of Nigeria. So welcome, members, once again. It's at this point that I'll allow. Now, the members that are with us today on the panel are members who have over 20 years experience. Dr. Fola has over 20 years experience, 23 actually, years experience in revenue enforcement, mediation, in the Internal Revenue Service of Nigeria. She's a Tadat assessor, quite a bit of experience with Tadat. Tadat is the Tax Administration Diagnostic Assessment Tool, a tool that is used to assess the organizational health of tax administrations. It looks at 9 performance outcome areas, and these provide the good practices that all tax administrations across the globe do follow. And when assessing, we are able to identify the gaps and know how best to improve through the different reform agendas that we bring on board. With me as well, we have Gary Mulenga from Zambia Revenue Authority, over 20 years experience in tax administration. He has worked in the audit units in the tax appeals office and has taken up disputes with the tax appeals tribunal and has been an independent, has also been assigned assignments in the excise management function, which is in the indirect taxes and excise division, and is currently playing the role of the assistant director tax appeals. You're welcome, Gary Mulenga. Okay, we also have Juliet Nsime Odoki. She has over 14 years experience in tax administration, and she has worked in the audit function and has later moved over to the dispute resolution unit, where she has been serving since 2018 and is currently the manager objections. You're welcome, Juliet, to this forum. Wow, Dr. Fola is currently working as the, I'll allow her to introduce herself, Dr. Fola. We'll start with you and you will definitely take the first question as well. Dr. Fola, please go
Thank
on.
you, Blenda. Good afternoon all. My name is Folasade Koka. I'm the current Director, Informal Sector and Special Duties in the Lagos State Internal Revenue Service, which is a subnational in Nigeria. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. Over to you, Blenda.
Thank you so much, Dr. Folasade. I was pronouncing it wrongly. I had to get the right pronunciation. So with the introductions that have been done, I believe we have the right people right now who are going to discuss this hot topic right now that is at the table. And like I said before, it's tax dispute resolutions and their linkages to the audit function. And we are going to basically look at the successes and challenges. Now, under the TADAT, we have adopted the linkages functionality, where we link the performance outcome areas, the 9 performance outcome areas, because we realize that many times some of them might be a root cause of the performance of another performance outcome area. And today, that is basically what we are looking at, the linkages between the audit function and the tax dispute resolution. Now, the tax dispute resolution is covered under the performance outcome area that looks at effective tax dispute resolution. And that being said, I'd like to hear from you, Dr. Fola, if you may allow me to call you by that. Give us a high level of how tax administration audit functions influence the dispute resolution process. And to what extent does the quality of the audit function determine the number of disputes that have been lodged in by taxpayers?
Thank you, Blenda. So I think the first thing is that to understand how the tax administration's authority functions influence its dispute resolution process. It's key to appreciate and understand what actions of the tax administration can inform or prolong dispute resolutions and how to curb those and also minimize it. So firstly, we need to understand that there are 3 critical areas in which a taxpayer is entitled to dispute. The first is where there are issues of accuracy with respect to facts that are relied on by the auditor who carried out the audit. The second is whether the interpretation of the law is correct or whether they use the literary mischief or golden rule, which has created a kind of gray area in interpretation. The third and last is that where an objection with respect to the amount of penalty imposed by the tax administration is also in question. So what this means is that to minimize unnecessary disputes, it's important that the tax administration must ensure that the process of audit is credible and that the assessments raised from such audits will not be disputed by the taxpayer because there is trust. The taxpayer trusts and believes and knows that the process of the tax administration is credible. And to achieve this, it's important that the tax administration puts in place and implements some of the following. One is that they must have an independent and workable graduated dispute resolution process. And this is as stated in Performance Outcome Area 7 for those of us that know the field guide. And it's also important that it's a single process and it should not be multi-layered. And also that the judicial review in place is not only available to the taxpayer, but it must actually be seen to be used by the taxpayer. And where the taxpayer is not satisfied, of course, they have the higher appellate courts and other things. Also, it's important that the tax administration's review process is independent of the tax audit process. And it's important that the taxpayer perceives that process and that structure within that tax administration to be sound. How the tax administration also responds to dispute outcomes is also critical. And whether they act on it or they just file it or they just take it as an act of service without actually using it to impact voluntary compliance is also important where dispute resolution process is. You equally asked the question, you asked about the quality of the audit functions and how this determines disputes lodged by the taxpayers. Yes, it does impact the dispute lodged by the taxpayers to a very large extent because the process used by the tax administrator must be based on a legal framework. And this legal framework must not only be known by the taxpayer, but it must be understood. It must be simplified. It must be accessible to them. So the tax administration must have those on their website. They must have those in their flyers, in their frequently asked questions. They must publicize it, say it during stakeholders' engagement. And that structure must be put in place to guarantee that there's a transparent and independent decision-making process that allows disputes not only to be resolved, but to be resolved in a timely manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fola. I like the fact that you've outlined for us the good practices that need to be followed by tax administrations. And one thing that stands out for me is that the tax dispute resolution function should be independent of the audit function. And I would like to pose a question to Juliet, okay? Juliet has worked in the audit function and has recently moved into the tax dispute resolution. And I would like to hear from you, Juliet, based on your experience that you have had over these 14 years in both functions. What should a tax administration do in terms of minimizing the number of disputes that are lodged by taxpayers? What mechanisms should be adopted? And what strategies should the audit function implement to minimize this conflict? Juliet?
Thank you, Brenda. As you rightfully said, I have taken time to work in both functions. And I'd like to say that for the audit function, to minimize influence into the dispute resolution, it's very critical that from the start of the audit, there is what we call a lot of communication. Most times, from what I have seen, communication is very key between the tax body and the taxpayer. So from the start, there has to be communication that there's going to be an audit. What are the areas that are going to be covered? What is expected of the taxpayer? What information will be required? What are the tax laws that are going to be used in assessing this person? And the availability of information is also critical. We also look at, we encourage a lot of engagement. Reconciliation is key as well, because whereas you can communicate, if you do not sit back with the client and try to understand their business and try to reconcile the information that you have received, both from what you have internally as a tax body and what you get from the taxpayer, it's very critical for reconciliation to take place, because if that is not done, then the client is not heard. And if they feel they are not heard, there will definitely be a dispute to resolve. Another thing that I have experienced is that there is need for the taxpayer to appreciate beforehand what the taxman is planning to do. For example, in Uganda, we now issue what we call the compliance improvement plan project. We notify the taxpayers way beforehand that these are the areas that the taxman is going to be looking at. So it gives them a chance to prepare themselves, gives them a chance to look out and see where they could be going wrong or where they need improvement. So by the time the audit takes place, there is very little room for discussion. Then the other issue would be information gathering. We, as an auditor, it's very important that you have all the information that you need before you issue an assessment. Because once you have exhausted all the sources of information, then it is very difficult for the taxpayer to then come up and say there is a problem here or there, or this wasn't looked at, because they'll have availed you all the information that you require to make a decision. So I think if those parameters are followed, I believe that the dispute resolution would not really be required that much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliet. And you've been quite elaborate. One thing that I have taken from what you have mentioned, it's important for us to manage the client's expectations right from the beginning, through the communication, through the information gathering, through the reconciliation, right? And as you said that, I would like to pose a question to Mr. Gary. We know that disputes arise from audits and assessments. And dispute resolution results should also be made public. What does this mean? The taxpayers need to know their rights and the resolution process that they have to use. I would like to hear from you. What do you have to say about that statement? Disputes arise from audits and assessments arising therefrom. Dispute resolution results should be made public so taxpayers know their rights and resolution process they have to use. What are your comments on that statement? Mr. Mulenga, over to you.
Sure. My first comment, Blender, there, which summarizes my thoughts on the matter, really is that I couldn't agree more with that statement. First of all, we're talking about disputes arising from the audits and the assessments. I think from my experience in tax administration, that's probably the greatest source of disputes that the tax administration faces is from audits. There's a question about facts, there's a question about interpretation of the law, there's a question about classification, categorization of the income and what tax rates they should be subject to. There's even a question about even the recognition of the income and when it should be taxed and all. Sometimes there are even questions about who should be bearing this tax. All these arise out of audits and assessments. Now, a good dispute resolution process, which is independent of the audit function, which looks purely at the tax legislation and gives a recommendation or a position based on what corresponds to the tax law that is in place at the time, it is quite key. It improves the taxpayer experience. And if it is made known to the public, then it helps the public know that they actually have rights. I agree with how the question brings it out, but also not just that they have rights, but that also there is a system by which they get relief, and it is an objective system. It also would help, in my view, to some extent, have tax dispute resolution be taken out of the equation by sort of having tax dispute avoidance. Here's why. If I'm an auditor and I know that if I produce an assessment, which I cannot back by law, and it goes through the dispute resolution process and it has to be reversed, this becomes known to the public. It doesn't reflect well on me and my audit function. I'm going to be more careful. So if there are things that I'm not so sure about, probably I will not have them as part of my assessment until I'm absolutely certain. So I totally agree. We need the taxpayers to know about the rights of the dispute resolution process, the rights that they have all the way through the tax authority up to independent bodies outside the tax authority. Like in my country, Zambia, this can go all the way up to the Supreme Court, and how this now becomes part of the jurisprudence for the tax law in the country.
Friends, you've heard for yourselves from our speakers today. It's important for the taxpayers to know their rights, and this will help us in managing the tax disputes. Regards to all the people who are logging in through the YouTube channel, through the LinkedIn channel, and as you're listening, in case you have any questions that might be arising along the discussion, please make use of the comments section and type in your comments, and we should be able to respond to them. Any questions you have for our panel members, experienced as they are ready to provide you with the right responses. So I'll just read out one of the questions that is coming through from the audience. And it says, doesn't the audit impact the outcome of the dispute? Because we didn't give function dispute office or tribunal, but I hardly see cases of tax dispute in our system. I would love to know where the question is coming from. Please type in the section where you're logging in from, whether you're from Tanzania or the USA or the Pacifics. Please log in. Would like to know who we are with on the platform. Maybe I'll throw this question to Dr. Fola. And the question from the audience, just as I have read it, doesn't the audit impact the outcome of the dispute? Because we didn't give the function dispute office or tribunal. Okay, if I'm to try and summarize what they are saying, they hardly see tax disputes coming through their system. What do you have to say about that, Dr. Fola?
So maybe for clarification, that they hardly see tax disputes coming through all the way to tribunal or to the courts of appeal or what?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I want to believe that is what they meant.
Okay. Well, what I will say from my experience is that the reality is that where people dispute liability and all that, some, it doesn't go all the way to the appeal or to court because a lot of people really do not want to be saddled with litigation. But there are some cases where you have taxpayers who actually want to follow through and be able to close an issue with respect to following through from the case of objection. But the beauty of it is that most times now you have tax administrations having a process and an internal structure where most of the cases are able to be resolved in-house, where the taxpayers object to instances of disputes, and they have structures where they have a reconciliation team, and by the time those cases are presented to the reconciliation team, documents are submitted and all that, and the cases are being able to be closed. But you still have those that go on to tax appeal where the taxpayer is not comfortable or in agreement with what the tax administration has decided with respect to their liabilities or audits. So you have taxpayers that go on to courts of appeal or tax appeal tribunals, and cases are decided, and maybe they really do not want to go on to appeal and all that, and some end up paying those liabilities. But the reality is that you still have, in a credible structure, in a graduated system where you have liabilities being treated in-house on the administrative level, and the graduation to courts of competent jurisdiction, and where the taxpayer is not okay with that decision, they're able to also go on to court of appeal. So I think that it's all about the structure. It's about enshrining those processes within the tax administration. It's about making that information available in the open space, your websites, your frequently asked questions, so that taxpayers would know that those opportunities and recourse to object and to actually find a closure to the assessments are available, and they are able to take advantage of that. And those must be simplified. Also in the audit books, when they are going for audits, or in letters of audits or notification of audits, those should also be made available in writing. Like in Lagos now, we do that in bold. In the letters of audits, notifying the taxpayers that an audit is going to be carried out, it's in bold that where those assessments are done and they wish to object to those assessments, that they can do so. The time frame within which they can also object to those are also stipulated. So there's clarity and information that the taxpayers can take advantage of, and they can do what they have to do with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fola. I have a follow-up question for you from Lamin Sao from the Gambia Revenue Authority, who has joined in via the LinkedIn platform. And the question goes that, what are some of the implications of inadequate tax provisions? And here we are looking at the laws in relation to the audits. Based on your experience I know you have been a part of various standard assessments for various tax administrations, and I'm certain you've come across various scenarios like this. Could you kindly share with us some of the implications of inadequate tax provisions in the laws in relation to the audits?
The critical implication that I will see is that where there are no provisions in the law, it creates a lacuna, a vacuum. And where there's a vacuum, anything can fill it. And anything filling it can be at a disadvantage either to the tax administration or to the taxpayer. So it's important and critical that a tax administration continues to do spring cleaning of their laws, reviewing the laws, seeing those that are should be outlawed or do not meet current day reality, or retweaking them and editing them to meet current day reality so that they'll be useful. Because what's the use of obsolete laws? What's the use of laws that do not add value either to the tax administration or to the taxpayer, and do not give the taxpayer the requisite opportunity of safety catch, where they can trust the system and know that where they have issues, they can actually depend on the law to support them or to back them up to be able to get respite or get the refund that they need or get resolution to audits that are creating a bottleneck. So it's important that a system, a tax administration, continues to revamp its laws, continue to look at it with respect to current day reality and modify it to be able to be fit for purpose and available to the taxpayers to take advantage of it. And that will end up building trust for the tax authority, because the taxpayers would have trust in the system and the structure and know that where they have objections or complaints, there are structures in the administration and outside the tax administration that they can have respites in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fola. What I'm picking from you, for us to build the confidence of our taxpayers, of our clients, it's important that the tax provisions actually speak to their needs.
Absolutely.
And they should be communicated to them, and they should be able to understand them.
Yes,
and what I'm picking,
manner.
Yes, in a simplified manner. And I hear a lot of capacity building coming through, because we are saying that they need to know what is expected of them. And so, based on that, and this question, I would like to pose it to Mr. Mulenga. So according to international good practice, tax auditors' training and experience determines the quality of the tax audit function of the administration to a considerable extent, and it impacts the tax dispute resolution mechanism. What is your take on this, based on where you sit as a leader in the tax administration for the tax appeals in Gambia Revenue Authority?
I agree with that statement, Blenda. And here is why. It's international good practice and we all know it. If you're going to have an effective audit and a solid outcome of that, the training and the experience is quite key of the auditors. I need to have in-depth knowledge of the business that I'm going to audit. And if I'm able to do a credible and solid job based on my technical competence and my application of the knowledge of the law to the peculiarities of the business, to some extent, I've even taken away some areas of points of dispute. But then secondly, if whatever comes out of my audit then does result in a dispute, if whoever has to preside over the dispute can see distinctively and clearly where I was basing my judgments on and my conclusions on, then it's easier to make a determination. One of the worst things that could happen, sitting from a tax dispute resolution office, is you not even understanding what the dispute is about, because you can't relate what the taxpayer is saying to what the auditor had said. So now, what about the quality of the audit? The quality of the audit for me really stems from a number of things. It has to do with technical competence of the person auditing, the familiarity of that person to the business, and good communication. I would like to focus on the third one. There are many others that will impact quality of an audit, but just the third one, the good communication. Sometimes you could be a very technically competent auditor. You understand the law, you have it on your fingertips. You may even have done an exceptional entry interview. You have a proper understanding of the business of the taxpayer from end to end, and you're able to identify where the tax points are. But if you have not communicated to the taxpayer the reason for your positions that you've taken, the legislative basis for your assessment, then there is quite likely to be a dispute, because all they think is that, look, this was my return and I paid this much tax. Why is Gary asking me to pay more? I've found that in as much as 50% of the time of the cases that we face, or even more, if simply an auditor had taken time to explain to the taxpayer the legislative basis for the decisions taken, then they may quite likely be at the same page and there may be nothing to dispute.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mulenga. To you, our viewers, our panelists are from Nigeria, from Zambia, and from Uganda. So this particular platform is to bring together all tax administrators to be able to share experiences and learn from each other. So there are peer-to-peer learning sessions, and from the experiences that our experts are sharing, and from the learning points that they've had over the years, we are able to improve ourselves in the various tax administrations. So that being said, Juliet, you're next on my agenda. In your previous submission, your earlier submission, you talked about the compliance improvement plan. And it's at this point that I would like to ask you, to what extent can the cooperative compliance impact the dispute resolution mechanism?
Thank you, Brenda. The cooperative compliance would really impact a lot on the dispute resolution. This is because cooperative compliance looks at trust between the tax body and the taxpayer. If there is trust that what the auditor is doing is correct, that there is trust that even if I go for a dispute resolution, it will be resolved in the best possible outcome. There is no biasness in any way. The assessment is based on facts, it's based on the law. Then there, I think there will be minimal need for dispute resolution. Yeah, that's my take on that.
Thank you so much, Juliet, for being elaborate with that. And yes, it's important that as tax administrations, it's important for us to have compliance improvement plans, because they guide us and provide us with a direction in terms of how we can manage the compliance of our taxpayers. We have to remember that what we are driving towards is voluntary compliance and less of the involuntary. So the audit function is one of those functions that should be helping to support taxpayers, our clients, to be able to move to the voluntary compliance bracket. So colleagues, viewers out there on our YouTube platform, on the LinkedIn platform, we welcome your questions. The experts here are here to address any issues that you might be facing in your various tax administrations, issues that you have been having long on your plate and have failed to possibly find a solution. The platform is here for you to help you find ways of how you can improve in your tax administrations. So Dr. Fola, I like referring to you because you are that lawyer. And when we talk about dispute resolution, it is all about the law. So when we speak about accuracy of reporting in declarations, how has this impacted the tax dispute resolution functions in our tax administrations?
Thank you.
Accuracy of reporting in declarations is performance outcome area 6. For those of you viewers who might not be familiar with the TADAT framework, the TADAT framework, I'll remind you once again, is the tax administration diagnostic assessment tool that assesses the health of our tax administrations. Dr. Fola, over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much. With respect to the accurate reporting and to what extent it affects dispute resolution. So it's important that a tax administration understands that verification programs that they engage in, that it has wider reach. It's not just a tax administration trying to generate revenue. So a tax authority must go beyond revenue generation to tax administration in a bid to reduce or minimize or avoid dispute resolutions. And one of the things that they need to focus on to ensure that they beam their light on one of the highest compliance risks is that what is the use of the accurate reporting with respect to that dispute resolution? One is that it's to ensure that it corrects anomalies or corrects issues in the short term by impacting interest and penalties where needed. It's also to act as a deterrent where you sometimes have to isolate taxpayers where you have to prosecute them criminally for tax evasion and avoidance. And it's also to gather intelligence. Gathering intelligence by way of looking at the audits that have been carried out and looking at it vis-a-vis risk and trying to quantify the revenues that have been lost and also reviewing likely perceived risk with a view to ensuring that they do not happen in the nearest future. So it's important that the tax authority must build capacity in systems of cross-checking with third-party information. There's the immigration, there are stocks, and they must look at that vis-a-vis information gotten from the reporting, so that where they are able to nil out a lot of inadequacies and inform the taxpayer, there will be no reason for dispute, because they've gotten information and they've used those third-party information to look at what the taxpayer has reported, and they've been able to build capacity on that and inform the taxpayer as to the inaccuracy of their declarations. It's also important that a lot of IT systems are brought into use. The consolidation of views from what from the taxpayer's compliance history, looking at that and looking at what the taxpayer has filed to see whether there is an increase or a growth that has not been declared, and using that to nil out a lot of silos from what the taxpayer has declared. It's also important that the tax administration must have an automated case management system where audits, information from audit feeds into reconciliation and ultimately transits to voluntary compliance. Because what's the use of where you go on audit year to year and the information that you continue to get from those audits does not feed to enable and enhance voluntary compliance? So for me, what I think is that where a tax administration carries out audits on a year-to-year basis, that means that the system or the structure or their process is inefficient and ineffective, because a taxpayer's information gotten from audit must feed into their voluntary compliance to ensure that that taxpayer next year is no longer audited, but is able to be brought up to speed and to voluntarily comply, because everything that is gotten from the audit would have been used to build their computation and to inform the taxpayer as to what the expectations of the tax administration is from them. So this will nil out disputes because it will be based on information gotten and not on best of judgment, not on assumptions, but also supported by third-party information that the tax administration would have gotten through profiling the taxpayer. So the information will be concrete, it will be accurate, and there will be no reason for dispute from the taxpayer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fola. And what I hear from you is all that we do should be driving towards the change of behavior of our taxpayers.
Yeah.
And it's at this point, Mr. Mlenga, I would like to throw this back to you. You've been a tax assessor. Yes, you've assessed tax. You've worked in tax fraud investigations. And now you are in the dispute resolution function. Please help us shed some more light on the importance of having all those functions independent of each other. What's the importance of the independence of the tax dispute resolution function from the tax audit function as well as the investigations? Mr. Mlenga.
In a word, it improves the taxpayer experience. If the taxpayer is aware that the person that raised an assessment on me that I'm disputing is not the one who's going to make a determination whether this assessment stands or not, it becomes easier for the taxpayer to appreciate and accept that decision, even if it doesn't go in their favor. But if they perceive that, well, Gary assessed me this, and he's the one who's going to have to make a determination whether the assessment sticks or not, then the dispute doesn't end. It's going to become a very difficult situation. And to that end, I may add, in this part of the world, we've got quite a bit of a way to go because we may not avoid interacting with the audit or investigations because many of us don't have that seamless automated system that Dr. Fola was talking about. Ideally, when a dispute arises, a properly independent dispute resolution function should not even have to pick up the phone call, send an email requesting for information from the audit function. They should be able to access everything from the online system. They should be able to access all the working papers, see all the assumptions that were made. And if that is done, then even from the taxpayer's perspective, they can see to say, look, they were not swayed by the audit people because they are looking at money. Because at the end of the day, the taxpayer is dealing with one tax authority. And they're probably going to say, well, Gary is sitting in tax dispute resolution, but he's paid the same money which comes from these tax assessments. So maybe he was inclined to go that way because it's a big tax liability. So you can't emphasize that more, Blender. There really has to be seen a distinction, a Chinese war, if you will, between the dispute resolution team as well as the audit.
Fantastic. It's interesting that you talk about the taxpayer experience. And when you talk about the automated systems, it's about the user experience. We are always talking about the client experience. We talk about the learner experience. Now we are talking about the taxpayer experience. And Juliet, we have a question from one of our viewers, Sam Adeyemi from Nigeria, who is joining in through our YouTube platform. And he's saying, in dispute, either the tax administration or the taxpayer bears a cost in terms of delayed revenue for the government. Experience comes in, right? So could there be a mechanism to address the causes of the disputes within a specified period? I know the provisions of the law provides timelines in which we are supposed to handle these disputes. So what do you have to say about this? What mechanisms can we put in place to address the causes of disputes within a specified period? Juliet?
Indeed, it's very critical that where there are disputes, that means there's going to be a cost to the revenue authority, because then they will not be able to collect the tax that was assessed. But it's also a cost to the taxpayer, because the fact that they are not sure of what is next to come, it causes a bit of anxiety. It causes they need now to forecast and come up with a plan on how they'll be able to pay up this tax. So in the tax laws, it's very clear that disputes should be handled within a certain amount of time. And so I believe that because the tax laws give, for example, in Uganda, it gives 90 days for a dispute to be handled. And so what we try to ensure is, even if it's 90 days, we try as much as possible to give this feedback or the decisions before the 90 days. That helps, one, in releasing revenue that should be collected, if in our view is collectible, and also gives some bit of closure to the client as well. So for timelines, it's first of all based in the law, then it's also based on how quick the resolution can be done, because for some matters, if it's a matter of interpretation of the law, then it has to be taken to the next level, which is either the tax appeals tribunal or it's taken to the High Court. And even at all those stages, the timing is also critical. Whereas as the revenue authority, you may not have so much influence when it moves away from there. The timelines seem to be affected. However, from what we have seen in Uganda is, by us having our disputes handled majorly with the tax appeals tribunal, we find that the time taken is shortened compared to if it went through the normal judicial process. So I agree with the person who asked the question. Yeah, it's very critical. Time is very critical, and we always need to put it at the forefront as we handle disputes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliet, for ironing that out and sharing with us the experience in Uganda Revenue Authority and the timelines that are provided for in the laws, as well as what is done to minimize moving into court to settle court cases other than doing it back at home. So Dr. Fola, the audit function falls largely under the performance outcome area 2 of that Audit framework, which is effective risk management. And we would like to hear from you how the Internal Revenue Service of Nigeria has capitalized on the tax compliance gap analysis in minimizing tax dispute resolution. How has the Internal Revenue Service tapped into the tax compliance gap analysis to deal with the tax dispute resolution?
Okay, thank you, Blenda. Yes, we spoke earlier about the cooperative compliance, and the beauty of the cooperative compliance is looking at high-end accounts and trying to see as much as possible how you can nil out dispute, cases of litigation by addressing those issues earlier, so that they don't fall due for litigation and you're able to close it quickly. Because in closing it quickly, you are able to save costs, because one of the cardinals of taxation is cost of collection. So at the forefront of every tax administrator, you must always look at whether your actions or your inactions is saving the government funds or is adding liabilities to the government by delaying and deferring collections that should have come in. So tying that now to compliance, what we do in, and LIRS is just a state revenue service in Nigeria. So I will just be speaking from that small view. Of course, that small view also speaks to the majority of revenue, IGR, that is being generated in Nigeria. So what we do is to have large accounts. Large accounts are given to specific account officers, and they are supposed to look at it online real time and ensure that they are like account officers in the banks. When you want to get an ATM card, they are the go-to person. So when issues pertaining to a company are being looked at or fall due, those account officers are supposed to look at it, review it, and ensure that as much as possible, they try to avoid a litigation on that case. So they should address it. They should look at the gaps and look at it vis-a-vis maybe audits that have been done in previous years and how those audits can be feeders into ensuring that that company going forward complies voluntarily, or how they will use that information to address cases and have the company representatives come for a meeting. And at that meeting, they'll be able to present the facts to that company and ensure that going forward, they chart the path of compliance. So we use a lot of gap analysis. There's a lot of profiling that we use. We try as much as possible to avoid silos and to look at all facets of a taxpayer. Are you registering a car and you are declaring nil income? Are you registering a land or trying to build a house? So we try to tie all that together to create a total and holistic picture of a taxpayer with a view to assessing them objectively. Because the more you move away from best of judgment, the better it is for a tax administration to avoid litigation. Because when you move away from best of judgment, you are speaking to facts and looking at third-party information to create a total picture of that taxpayer. So those are the things, some of the things that we use to create an holistic picture of a taxpayer and to nail out gaps and silos with a view to ensuring that little or no, to minimize tax audits and to ensure that we reduce to a large extent disputes. Of course, there are people that no matter the liability you give them, they would always object, because there are those that just want to test the law. So you should always know, as a tax administrator, there will be people that for want of nothing, they really do not want to comply, or they just want to test the law and see whether the law will sway in their own favor. So, but apart from that, once you are able to create a total picture of the taxpayer using third-party information, either from stocks, from accounts, from immigration and all that, and you're able to pose before them the facts and the realities of their liability, a lot of them would voluntarily comply and would do the needful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fola. So our target is to minimize the tax audits to reduce the tax disputes.
Yes.
Friends, viewers online, we have exactly 6 minutes left to the closure of our session. If you have any questions that are still pending, please drop them into the comments section and we will be able to respond to them. But as we wind up, please don't hesitate. Even if we have little time left, we will still be able to respond even after. Please send through your comments. We can still have them responded to. So as we draw closer to the closing of the session, I would like to hear parting shots from our panel members. And I will start off with the only man in the room, Gary. Yeah, the only man in the room. Would like to hear from you. What are some of your parting shots to the other tax administrators who are logged in and are listening to us today as we discuss the tax dispute resolution and their linkages to the audit function?
Let me start off by saying, Blenda, that I was a little scared when I saw the panel and I said, okay, I'm the only one there. Gender imbalanced. I've been guilty of that in my office. I run an office where we only have one lady out of 8. So I'm getting my just desserts here.
Wow.
But really, something that I really... Something that I would really love to get back on is, because the conversation was around how the linkages to audit are with the dispute resolution. I think there's nothing that gives rise to a greater amount of disputes as opposed to the audit. And sometimes, depending on how it's managed, can even be acrimonious. So really managing the audit process from the outset is going to be very key. That would be my parting shot. We need to have our auditors very well trained and experienced. And it might sound funny, but probably the more experienced ones in terms of years in the authority probably need more training right now, because commerce is always changing and legislation always changes slower than commerce. So if you're up to you keeping up to date with the changes in commerce, then you'll be able to appreciate to say that some perceived or even real tax gaps are not going to arise because the taxpayer was intending to engage in tax malfeasance, but they are just in a situation where the law hasn't caught up yet with them. Their businesses were ahead of our legislation. We haven't provided for how to tax that income. Now, that's where the experience and the knowledge comes in, being able to understand what is it that has led to this particular liability or tax gap being observed. And then, very key, let the taxpayer know where you're coming from. Know what their business is, also know where they're coming from. I always tell my teams, however knowledgeable you are as a tax person, you're never going to know the taxpayer's business more than them. So it has to be a conversation, and that's where the cooperative compliance comes in. We need to look at them as business partners. We unfortunately, as tax authorities, we are selling a product that our client has got no option but to buy from us. And so we have to make that a little bit easier and more pleasurable for them. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you so much, Gary. I have had and picked a lot in your summary. One is cooperative compliance. Make the taxpayers more of our business partners, because they know more of what their business is like than we do. But key to note, it's important for us to future-proof our auditors. Future-proof them, continuously upskill, reskill, and retool them so that they can remain relevant in this VUCA environment that we are in. The economy keeps changing. So thank you so much, Mr. Mulenga. Juliet, would like to hear from you. What are some of your parting shots as we conclude our session?
Thank you, Brenda. In my parting shots, I would just like to thank my fellow panelists. I think they are very, very insightful in this topic. Key to note, yes, is there's a very big dependence of the dispute resolution with the audit function. So if the audit function is functioning optimally and is doing what is expected, then we will see a drop in the dispute resolution that we usually handle as the tax body. And so it's very critical, like you have said, to keep the audit team trained and up to date with the trends in the economy and what is happening not only in your local locality but internationally. It's very key for people to keep abreast with whatever is happening so that we are able to address in real time the different aspects that affect every different taxpayer, because everyone is different, everyone runs their business differently. With that, I'd just like to say thank you for this opportunity and have a nice day.
Thank you so much, Juliet. What I pick from you is that our competitors as tax administrations are more of our taxpayers. As we plan, they are also planning. So we have to keep up to speed and always try to be ahead of them. So as we conclude, Dr. Fola, it's coming over to you. And as we wind up, as you give your parting shots, I'll just like to leave you with just one last question that has come through from Mr. Lamin, who has been one of our viewers today. And he's asking, what does digital assessment like online platforms, SIPCA excise, telecoms and fuel prices, digital tracking technology use by audit assessments in terms of dispute? Can they be used as a baseline or give us baseline data for our audits? I hope I've got him right. And as you respond to that, you can also give your parting shots.
Okay, thank you. Well, in creating an holistic view of a taxpayer with a view to being able to accurately assess that taxpayer, yes, you can take advantage of those online information. And if it's possible to cross-check them with other information to be able to ensure the accuracy of those, then yes. I'm just hoping that that is the answer to that question, or I'm able to address that question. But yes, such information, because yes, we go back to training. It's necessary that we are trained and retrained, looking at the social media space and a lot of economics and marketing and all that is going there, and try to see how those can be harnessed and taxed adequately and appropriately with a view to enhancing IGR. So yes, I believe that it's important and critical to have a look, a very critical look at that space and harness it to the IGR. So for me, my closing will be on a tripod: structure, simplification, and training. We cannot overemphasize training and retraining, because knowledge is key. It will be very shameful or disheartening to have a tax auditor go to a company, and in reviewing the books, the company's accountant is more knowledgeable than the tax administrator. So that would mean that it's either there's revenue loss or there's mistrust on the part of the taxpayer for the tax administration. It's also important that tax administrations invest in ICT and a lot of information to enable their auditors to profile and to have an overview of what a taxpayer's sector is. Simplification. The more simplified processes are, the more taxpayers voluntarily comply. Because in my line of business, I've realized that a lot of taxpayers actually want to comply, but the what, when, how, and where of compliance is filled with gray areas. So they are not able to. So let tax administrators invest in their websites and all that, and make this information readily and easily available to taxpayers, and you'll find out that taxpayers would comply and would have less or minimal disputes in place. Another one is structure. It's important and critical that tax administrations put a structure and a process in place that is guided by timelines, and that they respect those timelines, because in respecting those timelines, the tax administration builds trust in the system, and taxpayers are able to know that where they have objections, those objections will be properly dealt with within a time space, and they'll be able to go back to their businesses instead of being inundated by objections and several invitations to the tax administration's office. So Blenda, I want to thank you for this opportunity and thank my co-speakers. It's been very knowledgeable and insightful for me. Thank you very much. God bless.
God bless you too, Dr. Fola, and thank you so much for your parting shots. And what I have clearly heard from you, it's about the taxpayer experience. What experience are we providing our taxpayers as tax administrations in terms of our structures, simplification of our processes, and the knowledge of our auditors? How knowledgeable are they to provide that experience that will drive our taxpayers to be voluntarily compliant? So thank you so much for today. We would like to appreciate each of you, the viewers who have managed to log in today to be a part of this critical conversation. And I believe there have been a lot of learning that has happened from the experiences that has been shared by our panel members, our experienced panel members, and I think you've heard it for yourselves from what they had to share from us. So thank you so much. I would like to appreciate the TADAT Secretariat as well, the unit chief, Mr. Modest, and the Secretariat that has come through to support us and provide a platform where we can come as tax administrations, our communities of practice, for us to share our experiences and learn from each other across the globe. And lastly, I would like to appreciate the planning team, the brains behind the coffee chats. I hope each one of you had a coffee cup with you to accompany you as you listening to the discussion and that you have been able to learn. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I wish you a pleasant day. And for those who are in the same time zone as